The summer heat was getting to everyone that Tuesday afternoon. David pulled his pickup truck into the gas station, feeling tired after the long drive home. He had been away for 8 months on deployment and everything looked different somehow. The same old gas station, the same cracked pavement, but it all felt strange after being overseas for so long. David stepped out of his truck and stretched his arms. He was wearing a simple gray t-shirt and jeans, nothing fancy. His hair was cut short, military style, but that was pretty normal around this part of town. Lots of guys kept their hair that way even after leaving the service. The gas station was busy. A few cars were parked at the pumps and people were going in and out of the store. David walked to the pump and started filling up his tank. The numbers on the screen kept climbing higher and higher. Gas prices had gone up while he was away, just like everything else. While the tank was filling, David noticed a police car pull into the parking lot. The officer inside seemed to be looking around, checking things out. David didn't think much of it. Police officers stopped by gas stations all the time. It was normal. But then David noticed the officer was staring right at him. The cop had sunglasses on, so it was hard to tell exactly where he was looking, but David could feel those eyes on him. It made him uncomfortable. He had done nothing wrong. He was just getting gas like anyone else. The officer, whose name tag read Walsh, got out of his car slowly. He was a big guy, probably in his 40s, with a thick mustache. His uniform looked crisp and clean, like he took pride in his appearance. But there was something about the way he walked that seemed aggressive, like he was looking for trouble. David tried to ignore the officer and focus on pumping gas. The tank was almost full. Just a few more minutes and he could get back on the road. He wanted to get home to see his family. His mother had been cooking all morning, preparing his favorite meal. She always did that when he came back from deployment. "Hey you," Officer Walsh called out. His voice was loud and carried across the parking lot. A few people looked over to see what was happening. David looked around, wondering if the officer was talking to someone else. But Walsh was walking straight toward him, his hand resting on his belt near his radio. "Yeah, you with the truck," Walsh said again. "I need to talk to you." David felt his heart rate increase slightly. He had dealt with police before, and it was usually fine. But something about this officer's tone made him nervous. It wasn't friendly or professional. It sounded hostile. "Is there a problem, officer?" David asked politely. He had been trained to stay calm in difficult situations. That training kicked in now. "That's what I'm trying to figure out," Walsh replied, stopping a few feet away. "What are you doing here?" The question seemed strange. David was obviously getting gas. What else would someone be doing at a gas station? But he decided to answer anyway. "Just filling up my truck, sir. Heading home." Walsh looked David up and down, studying him carefully. His eyes lingered on David's military-style haircut, his posture, the way he carried himself. But instead of recognizing these as signs of military training, Walsh seemed to see something else entirely. "Where's home?" Walsh asked. "About 20 minutes from here. On Maple Street near the school." "Maple Street, huh?" Walsh's tone suggested he didn't believe this answer. "That's a nice neighborhood." "What do you do for work?" David hesitated. He was proud of his military service, but something told him to be careful about how much information he shared. This conversation was already feeling wrong. "I serve in the Navy," David said simply. Walsh laughed, but it wasn't a friendly laugh. It was the kind of laugh that suggested he thought David was lying. "Navy? What kind of ship do you work on, sailor?" The way Walsh said sailor sounded mocking, like he didn't believe it for a second. "I'm not on a ship. I'm with a special operations unit." This seemed to annoy Walsh even more. His expression hardened and he stepped closer to David. Close enough that David could smell his aftershave and see the sweat stains under his arms. "Special operations? You mean like the Navy SEALs?" Walsh's voice was dripping with sarcasm now. David nodded. He had earned that title through years of brutal training and dangerous missions. It wasn't something he talked about casually, but he wasn't going to lie about it either. "Right," Walsh said, shaking his head. "And I'm an astronaut." "You got any ID on you?" "Of course." David reached slowly for his wallet, making sure to move carefully. He had heard stories about misunderstandings during traffic stops, and he wanted to avoid any confusion. He pulled out his military ID card and handed it to Walsh. The card clearly showed his name, rank, and unit assignment. It had his photo and all the official seals and markings that proved it was genuine. Walsh looked at the ID for a long time, turning it over in his hands. He held it up to the light, apparently looking for signs that it might be fake. But the card was real and there was no way to dispute what it said. "This could be fake," Walsh said finally, handing the card back. "Anyone can make one of these on a computer these days." David felt a surge of anger but kept it under control. His military training had taught him to stay calm under pressure, and this definitely qualified as pressure. He took a deep breath and tried to keep his voice steady. "That's a real military ID, officer. You can call the base if you want to verify it." "Oh, I might just do that," Walsh said. But instead of making any moves to verify the ID, he continued to stand there, staring at David with obvious suspicion. By now, other people at the gas station had started to notice the conversation. A woman filling up her SUV at the next pump kept glancing over. An elderly man coming out of the store slowed down to watch. A teenager sitting in his car had his phone out, though it wasn't clear if he was texting or recording. The gas pump clicked off, indicating that David's tank was full. He wanted nothing more than to hang up the nozzle, get in his truck, and drive away. But Walsh was blocking his path to the driver's side door. "You seem nervous," Walsh observed. "Why are you nervous if you haven't done anything wrong?" "I'm not nervous," David replied, though that wasn't entirely true anymore. "I just want to finish getting gas and go home." "In a hurry to get somewhere?" Walsh asked. "Meeting someone? Making a delivery?" The questions were getting more and more strange. David couldn't understand what Walsh was implying. Making a delivery? What kind of delivery? He was just a guy getting gas on his way home from the airport. "I'm not making any delivery," David said. "I just flew back from overseas this morning. I've been deployed for 8 months. My family is expecting me home." Walsh's expression didn't change. If anything, he looked more suspicious than before. "Overseas, huh? What country?" David named the country where his unit had been stationed. It was a place that had been in the news a lot recently, involved in ongoing military operations. "Convenient story," Walsh said. "Real convenient. You got any proof you were actually there?" The question was absurd. What kind of proof was David supposed to carry around? His passport was in his luggage back at his apartment. His orders were classified. His combat decorations were packed away in boxes. "My military ID shows my unit assignment," David said patiently. "You can verify my service with one phone call." But Walsh didn't seem interested in making that call. Instead, he was studying David's truck, looking through the windows at the interior. "Nice truck," Walsh commented. "Pretty expensive? How does a Navy guy afford a truck like this?" The implication was clear, and it made David's blood boil. But he forced himself to stay calm. Getting angry would only make things worse. "I saved my money while I was deployed," David explained. "When you're overseas, there's not much to spend money on." Walsh nodded slowly, but his expression suggested he wasn't buying this explanation either. It seemed like no matter what David said, Walsh was determined to find something suspicious about it. The situation was becoming more uncomfortable by the minute. David could feel other people staring at them now. The woman at the next pump had finished filling her tank but wasn't leaving. She was pretending to clean her windshield while obviously listening to their conversation. David had faced enemy fire in combat zones. He had jumped out of planes and conducted dangerous missions behind enemy lines. But somehow this conversation with a small-town police officer was more stressful than any of that. At least in combat, he knew who the enemy was. Walsh wasn't done with his questions. He seemed to be getting more aggressive with each passing minute. David could see other customers starting to notice the situation. Some were recording with their phones, though they were trying to be subtle about it. "I'm going to need you to empty your pockets," Walsh announced, as if this was perfectly normal procedure for someone getting gas. David felt his jaw tighten. "Why? I haven't done anything wrong." "That's for me to decide," Walsh shot back. "Empty your pockets now." This was clearly beyond what any reasonable traffic stop would require. David knew his rights, but he also knew that arguing with a police officer in public could escalate things quickly. He looked around at all the people watching and made a decision. "Officer, I don't understand why you're treating me like a criminal. I showed you my military ID. I answered all your questions. I just want to go home." Walsh's face was getting red now. The summer heat wasn't helping, but David could tell this was more about anger than temperature. "Don't tell me how to do my job," Walsh said, stepping even closer. "I've been a cop for 15 years. I know trouble when I see it." A middle-aged woman came out of the gas station store carrying a bag of snacks. She immediately noticed the tense situation and slowed down, clearly unsure whether she should get involved or just leave quickly. "You're causing a scene," David said quietly, hoping to remind Walsh that they had an audience. But Walsh didn't seem to care about the audience. If anything, having people watch seemed to make him more determined to prove his point. "The only one causing a scene is you. Resisting a simple police investigation." "I'm not resisting anything," David replied. "I've been cooperative this entire time." Walsh reached for his radio and keyed the microphone. "Dispatch, this is Unit 23. I need backup at the Shell station on Highway 9. I've got a suspicious individual who's being uncooperative." David couldn't believe what he was hearing. Suspicious individual? Uncooperative? He had done nothing but answer questions politely and show his identification. "Officer Walsh," David said, reading the name tag. "I really think there's been a misunderstanding here. I'm a Navy SEAL. I serve my country. I'm not some criminal you need to investigate." The moment David mentioned being a SEAL, Walsh's expression changed. But not in the way David expected. Instead of showing respect or recognition, Walsh looked almost offended. "You think I'm stupid?" Walsh said loudly. "You think I don't know what a real Navy SEAL looks like? SEALs are elite warriors, not—" He gestured at David dismissively. The teenager in the car nearby had his phone out now, clearly recording everything. The woman with the snacks had stopped walking and was watching the entire interaction. Even the gas station clerk had come outside to see what was happening. David felt a familiar calm descend over him. It was the same feeling he got during dangerous missions when everything slowed down and he could think clearly despite the chaos around him. His training was taking over. "Officer, you can verify my credentials with one phone call," David said in a steady voice. "My commanding officer can confirm my identity and service record. This doesn't have to become a bigger problem than it already is." But Walsh seemed determined to make it a bigger problem. He was pacing back and forth now, his hand never leaving his belt where his weapons were stored. "You know what I think?" Walsh said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I think you're trying to use stolen valor to get out of whatever it is you're really up to. Pretending to be a war hero when you're just another punk." The accusation hit David like a physical blow. Stolen valor was one of the worst things you could accuse a real veteran of. It meant pretending to have served when you hadn't, claiming honors and respect you didn't earn. For someone who had actually earned his place among the most elite warriors in the military, it was deeply insulting. "That's not true," David said, his voice still controlled but with an edge to it now. "I would never dishonor my service or my teammates by lying about what we do." Walsh laughed again, that same mocking sound from before. "Teammates? You watch too many movies, buddy. Real SEALs don't talk like that." David realized that nothing he said was going to convince this officer. Walsh had made up his mind from the moment he saw David at the gas pump. Every piece of evidence, every reasonable explanation was being dismissed or twisted into something suspicious. The backup unit arrived with lights flashing, but no sirens. Another police car pulled into the parking lot, and a younger officer got out. He looked around at all the people watching and recording, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. "What's going on here, Walsh?" the younger officer asked. "Got a suspicious individual claiming to be military," Walsh explained. "Says he's a Navy SEAL, can you believe that? Probably stolen valor, maybe drugs, who knows what else." The younger officer, whose name tag read Johnson, looked at David carefully. Unlike Walsh, Johnson seemed to actually be assessing the situation rather than just assuming guilt. "Did you run his ID?" Johnson asked. "Claims it's real, but anyone can fake these things," Walsh replied, waving David's military ID dismissively. Johnson took the ID from Walsh and examined it more carefully. He held it up to the light, looked at the official seals, studied the photo. Unlike Walsh, Johnson seemed to actually know what to look for in a genuine military identification card. "This looks legitimate to me," Johnson said after a minute. Walsh snatched the ID back. "Like I said, anyone can fake these on a computer. Has he been cooperative?" Johnson asked, argumentative, trying to tell me how to do my job. David wanted to speak up and defend himself, but he could see that Johnson was trying to de-escalate the situation. The younger officer was asking the right questions and actually listening to the answers. More people had gathered now. Word was spreading through the gas station that something was happening. The woman who had been cleaning her windshield was now openly recording with her phone. The elderly man from earlier had come back outside to watch. David noticed that some of the onlookers were starting to look uncomfortable. Not because they were afraid of him, but because they could see that Walsh was treating him unfairly. There's something about witnessing injustice that makes people uneasy, even when they're not sure what to do about it. "Sir," Johnson said to David, "would you mind if I verified your military service?" Unlike Walsh's demands, this sounded like an actual request. David appreciated the professional tone. "Not at all, officer. I'd welcome the verification." Johnson pulled out his phone and started making a call. While he was dialing, Walsh continued to pace around David's truck, looking through the windows and apparently searching for anything that might justify his suspicions. "Nice truck for someone on military pay," Walsh commented loudly, apparently for the benefit of the growing crowd. "I saved my deployment money," David explained again, knowing it probably wouldn't matter. "Right," Walsh said. "That's what they all say." The comment struck David as odd. They all say? Who was they all? What other military personnel had Walsh encountered that made him so skeptical of legitimate service? Johnson finished his phone call and walked back over. His expression was serious but not hostile like Walsh's. "I spoke with someone at the base," Johnson said. "They confirmed that this individual is indeed an active-duty Navy SEAL, currently on leave after returning from deployment." David felt a wave of relief. Finally, someone had done the basic work of verification that should have been done from the beginning. But Walsh's reaction wasn't what David expected. Instead of apologizing or backing down, Walsh seemed to become more agitated. "They could be lying too," Walsh said. "You can't trust anyone these days." Johnson stared at his partner with obvious concern. "Walsh, the guy's legitimate. His ID is real. His service is confirmed. We should let him go." "No," Walsh said firmly. "Something's not right here. I can feel it." The situation was spiraling further out of control. David could see more phones recording now. What had started as a simple gas stop was turning into a public spectacle. He thought about his family waiting at home, about his mother's cooking getting cold, about how this would all look on social media. But mostly, he thought about all the other service members who might face similar treatment. If this could happen to him, with his training and his ability to stay calm under pressure, what happened to other veterans who might not be as fortunate? Johnson was clearly trying to convince his partner to end the encounter, but Walsh seemed determined to find something, anything, that would justify his initial suspicions. He was searching David's truck with his eyes, looking at the ground around the gas pump, studying the faces of the watching crowd as if they might provide some clue to what he was missing. David remained still and calm, but inside he was preparing for whatever might come next. His military training had taught him to always have a plan, even when the situation seemed to be spiraling beyond anyone's control. The crowd was growing larger, and the phones were still recording. Whatever happened next was going to be captured on video and shared with the world. David found himself hoping that justice and common sense would prevail, but he was starting to have serious doubts about that outcome. The crowd around the gas station was getting bigger by the minute. People were coming out of the convenience store. Drivers were getting out of their cars, and even folks from the restaurant next door were walking over to see what all the commotion was about. David could hear people whispering to each other, trying to figure out what was happening. Most of them could see that he wasn't doing anything wrong. He was just standing there calmly while Officer Walsh continued to circle around him like a predator looking for weakness. "I want to search your vehicle," Walsh announced suddenly. Johnson, the younger officer, looked surprised. "On what grounds?" "I don't need grounds," Walsh snapped. "I have probable cause." "What probable cause?" Johnson asked. The guy's military ID checked out. He's been cooperative. He hasn't done anything suspicious. Walsh's face was getting redder by the minute. Having his partner question him in front of all these people was clearly making him angry. "Don't question me in front of civilians," Walsh said through gritted teeth. But it was too late for that. Everyone could hear their conversation. The phones were still recording and people were starting to post videos on social media in real time. Just then, an OL Dareman in the crowd stepped forward. He was probably in his 60s with gray hair and a military bearing that David recognized immediately. The man had been watching quietly, but something about the situation had clearly pushed him to act. "Excuse me, officers," the older man said in a clear, authoritative voice. "I couldn't help but overhear this conversation." Walsh spun around, annoyed by the interruption. "Sir, please step back. This is police business. I think you should know." The older man continued, ignoring Walsh's demand, that this young man is telling the truth about his military service. And how would you know that? Walsh asked sarcastically. The older man reached into his wallet and pulled out a card. Because I'm Colonel Robert Chen, United States Marine Corps, retired. And I recognize this man from a ceremony I attended last month. David's eyes widened. He remembered Colonel Chen now. They had met briefly at an award ceremony where David's unit had been honored for their recent mission. The colonel had been there representing wounded veterans who couldn't attend. That's right, Colonel Chen continued, addressing the crowd as much as the officers. This man received a Bronze Star for valor during his last deployment. His actions saved the lives of 3 wounded soldiers who were trapped behind enemy lines. The crowd murmured in appreciation. Several people lowered their phones, suddenly feeling awkward about recording what was clearly a case of mistaken identity. Walsh, however, wasn't backing down. Anyone can claim to be a colonel. How do I know you're not in on this together? Colonel Chen smiled slightly, the way older military officers do when dealing with someone who's clearly out of their depth. He pulled out his phone and made a quick call. Mayor Henderson, this is Bob Chen. I'm at the Shell station on Highway 9, and I think you need to know what's happening here. Yes, that's right. The Navy SEAL from the ceremony. No, I think you better come down here yourself. While Colonel Chen was on the phone, more people in the crowd began to speak up. A woman in scrubs who looked like she might be a nurse said she had seen David's picture in the local newspaper. A man wearing a veteran's cap said he recognized the unit patch description from military publications. Johnson was taking notes now, clearly realizing that this situation was much bigger than a routine stop. He kept glancing at Walsh with concern, obviously worried about where this was all heading. Walsh, Johnson said quietly, maybe we should wrap this up. The guy's story is checking out from multiple sources. But Walsh was like a man possessed. I don't care if the president himself shows up. Something's not right here, and I'm going to figure out what it is. David had remained silent during most of this exchange, but now he decided to speak up. Officer Walsh, I understand you're trying to do your job. But at what point does this stop being a legitimate investigation and start being harassment? The question hung in the air. Everyone could see that David had been nothing but cooperative. He had shown his ID, answered questions, submitted to verification of his military service, and remained calm despite being treated like a criminal. A teenage girl in the crowd called out, "This is going viral." There's already like 1,000 shares. Walsh spun around to face her. Put that phone away. It's a public place, the girl replied. I have the right to record. More people were pulling out their phones now. What had started as a few curious onlookers had become a full-scale social media event. Hashtags were already forming. Your justice for our veterans, your use respect our troops, your use gas station incident. Colonel Chen finished his phone call. The mayor is on his way. So is the police chief. They want to understand why a decorated war hero is being treated like a criminal at a gas station. David felt a mix of gratitude and embarrassment. He appreciated the support, but he hadn't wanted this to become a public spectacle. All he had wanted was to get gas and go home to his family. Johnson's radio crackled to life. All units be advised that Chief Martinez is en route to the Shell station on Highway 9, ETA 5 minutes. Walsh's confident demeanor finally started to crack. The arrival of the chief meant there would be questions asked and reports filed. His actions would be scrutinized by people higher up the chain of command. Fine, Walsh said, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. But I want it on record that I still think something's fishy about this whole situation. What's fishy about it? Johnson asked. A soldier comes home from deployment, stops for gas, shows valid military ID, and gets verified by multiple credible sources. What part of that seems suspicious to you? Walsh couldn't answer that question, at least not in a way that would make sense to anyone listening. The truth was becoming clear to everyone present. Walsh had made assumptions based on appearance, not evidence. A news van pulled into the parking lot. Someone in the crowd had called the local TV station, and they were setting up for a live broadcast. The reporter, a young woman with perfectly styled hair, was already talking to people in the crowd, trying to piece together what had happened. David sighed. This was exactly what he hadn't wanted. Military personnel were taught to stay out of the spotlight, to serve quietly and professionally. Having his personal situation become a news story felt deeply uncomfortable. But Colonel Chen approached him with a different perspective. "Son, I know this isn't what you wanted, but sometimes these things need to happen. People need to see what's going on." "I just wanted to go home," David said quietly. "I understand, but look around you." Colonel Chen gestured to the crowd. "Look at all these people who stepped up to support you. That means something." David looked at the faces around him. There was the woman in scrubs who had recognized him from the newspaper, the veteran with the military cap, the teenager who had helped spread the story on social media, even the gas station clerk who had come outside to witness what was happening to a customer on his property. These weren't people who knew him personally. They were just ordinary citizens who recognized injustice when they saw it and decided to do something about it. 2 more police cars arrived, followed quickly by an official-looking sedan that probably belonged to the police chief. The situation was growing beyond anything Walsh could control or contain. Johnson walked over to David. "Sir, I want to apologize for how this situation has been handled. You've been nothing but cooperative, and you deserve better treatment than this." "Thank you, officer. I appreciate you trying to de-escalate things." Johnson nodded. "I've been a cop for 5 years, and I've never seen anything like this. Walsh is, well, let's just say he has some issues he needs to work through." The police chief, a stern-looking woman in her 50s, was making her way through the crowd. Behind her was a man in a suit who was probably the mayor Colonel Chen had called. David straightened up instinctively. Even though he was in civilian clothes and technically on leave, old habits died hard. When senior officials arrived, you stood at attention. The chief surveyed the scene, the crowd of onlookers, the phones recording everything, the news crew setting up their equipment, and Officer Walsh standing off to the side looking like he wished he could disappear. "Someone want to explain to me what's happening here?" she asked in a voice that suggested heads were about to roll. The next few minutes were going to determine whether this incident ended with an apology and a handshake, or became something much bigger that would have consequences for everyone involved. David found himself hoping for the former, but preparing for the latter. His military training had taught him that battles rarely ended the way you expected them to, and this battle was far from over. Chief Martinez took one look at the scene and immediately understood that this was going to be a long day. The crowd, the cameras, the nervous expressions on her officers' faces, and a decorated veteran standing in the middle of it all told her everything she needed to know. "Officer Johnson," she said crisply, "give me a brief rundown of what happened here." Johnson straightened up and spoke clearly, aware that everything he said was being recorded by multiple phones. "Chief, we received a call for backup from Officer Walsh regarding a suspicious person. Upon arrival, I discovered that the individual in question is an active-duty Navy SEAL, whose military credentials have been verified through official channels." Chief Martinez turned to Walsh, whose face had gone from red to pale in the span of a few minutes. "Officer Walsh, is that an accurate summary?" Walsh opened his mouth, then closed it again. He looked around at all the people watching him, at the news crew preparing their equipment, at his own chief waiting for an answer. "I was investigating suspicious activity," he said finally. "What suspicious activity?" the chief asked. "The suspect was—" Walsh paused, realizing how his words were going to sound. The individual was acting nervous at the gas pump. Acting nervous how? Walsh couldn't answer that question in any way that would make sense. David had done nothing but pump gas and answer questions politely. There had been no suspicious behavior, no reasonable cause for investigation. Colonel Chen stepped forward again. "Chief Martinez, I'm retired Marine Colonel Robert Chen. I can personally vouch for this young man's character and service record. He's a legitimate war hero who was just trying to get home to his family." The mayor, a thin man in his 50s wearing a wrinkled suit, was listening to everything with growing alarm. He had arrived just in time to hear Walsh's weak explanation of suspicious activity, and he could see how this was going to play on the evening news. "David Thompson," the mayor said, reading from a note Colonel Chen had given him. "I want to personally apologize for what you've been put through here today. This is not how our community treats the men and women who serve our country." David nodded politely, but he could see that the situation was still evolving. The news crew was almost ready to go live, and more people were arriving every few minutes. What had started as a simple traffic stop was becoming a major incident. Chief Martinez was studying the crowd, taking in all the phones recording the interaction. She was clearly calculating the potential damage to her department's reputation. "Officer Walsh," she said, "I'm placing you on administrative leave pending a full investigation of this incident." Walsh's face went white. "Chief, I was just doing my job." "Your job is to protect and serve all citizens with respect and professionalism." Martinez cut him off. "That clearly didn't happen here." The crowd murmured approvingly. Several people applauded. The teenager who had been recording from the beginning called out, "It's about time." Johnson looked relieved that his chief was taking decisive action. He had been uncomfortable with Walsh's behavior from the moment he arrived, and now he wouldn't have to worry about being associated with it. The news reporter approached David with her microphone ready. "Mr. Thompson, could you tell our viewers what happened here today?" David hesitated. He wasn't used to being interviewed by reporters, and he wasn't sure he wanted his story broadcast on television, but Colonel Chen gave him an encouraging nod. "I just stopped for gas," David said simply. "I showed my military ID when asked. I answered all questions politely, and I never resisted or acted suspiciously. I don't understand why the situation escalated the way it did." "How does it feel to have your military service questioned?" the reporter asked. "It's disappointing," David replied. "Military personnel sacrifice a lot to serve their country. We deserve the same respect and fair treatment as any other citizen." The reporter turned to Chief Martinez. "Chief, what actions is the police department taking to address this incident?" "We are conducting a thorough investigation into Officer Walsh's conduct," Martinez said. "We have zero tolerance for any behavior that doesn't meet our professional standards." Meanwhile, the videos from the incident were spreading rapidly across social media. The hashtag #TheGasStationJustice was trending locally, and news outlets from neighboring cities were picking up the story. David's phone, which had been silent during the whole encounter, suddenly started buzzing with notifications. His commanding officer was calling. His mother was texting, asking if he was okay because she had seen something on Facebook. His teammates were sending messages of support. The mayor pulled Chief Martinez aside for a private conversation. David couldn't hear what they were saying, but he could see the concern on both their faces. This incident was quickly becoming a public relations nightmare for the city. A second news van arrived, this one from a regional network. Word was spreading beyond the local community. David realized that by tomorrow morning this story might be national news. Colonel Chen approached him again. "Son, I know this is overwhelming, but you've handled yourself with dignity throughout this whole ordeal. Your military bearing showed, even under pressure." "Thank you, sir. I just tried to stay calm like I was trained to do." "That training served you well. And it served all of us because people got to see what a real military professional looks like under stress." Officer Johnson came over to return David's military ID. "Sir, again I apologize for what happened here today. Not all police officers are like Walsh." "I understand that, officer. I have a lot of respect for law enforcement. Most cops are good people doing a difficult job." Johnson nodded gratefully. "I appreciate you saying that, especially after what you've been through." The crowd was starting to thin out as people realized the dramatic part of the incident was over. But many were staying to show their support for David, and others were still recording in case anything else happened. Walsh was standing by himself near his police car, apparently waiting for instructions from his chief. He looked defeated and angry at the same time, like someone who had just realized that his actions were going to have serious consequences. Chief Martinez finished her conversation with the mayor and approached David. "Mr. Thompson, I want to personally ensure that you receive a formal apology from our department. What happened here today is unacceptable." "I appreciate that, Chief. I also want you to know that we take officer misconduct very seriously. There will be a thorough investigation and appropriate action will be taken." David could see that she meant it. Chief Martinez struck him as someone who ran a professional department and wouldn't tolerate officers who brought negative attention to her force. The gas station manager, who had been watching nervously from the sidelines, finally approached. "Sir, your gas is on the house today. I'm sorry this happened at our station." "That's not necessary," David said. "Please, I insist. It's the least we can do." As the immediate crisis began to wind down, David found himself thinking about the broader implications of what had happened. This incident would be studied and discussed. Other police departments would use it as a training example. Other veterans might be treated better because people had witnessed this injustice. But there would also be negative consequences. Walsh's career was probably over. The police department would face scrutiny and criticism. The city would have to deal with bad publicity. Most importantly, David realized that this story was going to follow him for years to come. Every time someone searched his name online, they would find articles and videos about this incident. His military service would forever be linked to this moment at a gas station. The sun was starting to set, casting long shadows across the parking lot. What should have been a 5-minute stop for gas had turned into a 3-hour ordeal that would probably make national news. David looked at his phone and saw dozens of missed calls and messages. His family was worried, his friends were outraged, and his commanding officer wanted a full briefing on what had happened. Tomorrow would bring interviews, investigations, and probably more media attention than David had ever wanted in his lifetime. But tonight, all he wanted to do was get in his truck, drive home, and hug his family. The question was whether the world would let him do that, or if this incident had changed everything forever. 3 weeks later, the story had taken on a life of its own. The video of David's encounter with Officer Walsh had been viewed over 2 million times across various social media platforms. News outlets from across the country had picked up the story, and David had been interviewed on 3 different television programs. He never wanted to be famous, especially not for something like this. But as Colonel Chen had told him, sometimes these things need to happen for the greater good. The official investigation into Walsh's conduct had been swift and thorough. Chief Martinez had assembled a panel of investigators who reviewed all the video evidence, interviewed witnesses, and examined Walsh's previous interactions with the public. What they found was disturbing. This wasn't Walsh's first questionable stop. Over the past 2 years, there had been 6 formal complaints filed against him, all following a similar pattern. Citizens who felt they had been targeted unfairly, treated with disrespect, or subjected to unnecessary searches and questioning. The complaints had been filed, processed through the system, and essentially ignored. Walsh received counseling and additional training, but no real consequences. The department had failed to recognize a pattern of problematic behavior. David's case was different because it had been recorded and shared widely. The department couldn't ignore it or handle it quietly through internal channels. The public was watching and they demanded accountability. Walsh was fired after the investigation concluded. He appealed the decision through his union, but the evidence against him was overwhelming. The video footage alone showed clear violations of department policy and constitutional rights. But losing his job wasn't Walsh's only consequence. The incident had damaged his reputation so severely that finding new employment became nearly impossible. Other police departments wouldn't hire him. Private security companies didn't want the liability. Even jobs outside law enforcement became difficult to obtain once employers Googled his name. His family relationships suffered too. His wife was embarrassed by the constant media attention. His children faced questions and comments at school. The incident had changed their lives just as much as it had changed David's. Chief Martinez used the case to implement sweeping changes in her department. All officers now wore body cameras during every public interaction. New training programs focused on implicit bias and de-escalation techniques. A civilian oversight board was created to review complaints against officers. Most importantly, the department created an early warning system to identify officers who were developing patterns of problematic behavior before they reached Walsh's level. David, meanwhile, had become an unintentional spokesman for veterans' rights and police accountability. He received invitations to speak at conferences, universities, and community events. People wanted to hear his story and learn from his experience. At first, he turned down most of these requests. He was a soldier, not a public speaker. He preferred action to words, service to celebrity. But gradually he realized that his voice could make a difference. His first major speaking engagement was at a police academy graduation ceremony. Standing before 200 new officers, David shared his story not to criticize law enforcement, but to help them understand the importance of treating every citizen with dignity and respect. "I don't want you to remember me as the guy who was mistreated by a police officer," he told the graduating class. "I want you to remember me as someone who served his country and then came home to serve his community in a different way. Most police officers are good people doing difficult work. Be one of those good officers." The speech was well received and video clips of it went viral on social media. David began to understand that his platform could be used for positive change. He also filed a federal civil rights lawsuit against the city and Walsh personally. His lawyer argued that the stop was based on racial profiling and violated David's constitutional rights. The city, recognizing the strength of the evidence and wanting to avoid a costly trial, settled for a substantial amount. David used part of the settlement money to establish a foundation that provided legal support for veterans who faced discrimination or mistreatment. He also donated to organizations that worked to improve police-community relations. The money wasn't really the point, though. The lawsuit sent a message that there were real consequences for officers who violated citizens' rights. Other cities began reviewing their own policies and training programs, hoping to avoid similar incidents. Walsh, facing financial ruin from legal fees and unable to find steady work, eventually moved to another state where his notoriety was less well known. But the internet never forgets, and his reputation followed him wherever he went. He gave one interview to a local newspaper, claiming that he had been unfairly treated and that his actions had been misunderstood. But the interview only generated more criticism and reminded people of the original incident. David felt conflicted about Walsh's downfall. He had never wanted to destroy anyone's life or career, but he also recognized that actions have consequences, and Walsh's behavior had been unacceptable for someone in a position of authority. Colonel Chen, who had become a mentor to David, offered perspective during one of their regular conversations. "You didn't ruin Walsh's career," the colonel told him. "Walsh ruined his own career through his choices and actions. You just happened to be the person where his pattern of behavior was finally exposed." "I know that intellectually," David replied, "but it's still hard to see someone's life fall apart, even when they brought it on themselves." "That shows good character," Colonel Chen said. "But remember, how many other people did Walsh mistreat before you? How many more would he have mistreated if this incident hadn't happened? Sometimes one person has to pay a price so that others don't have to suffer." The incident also had positive effects that David hadn't expected. Several other veterans reached out to him, sharing their own stories of discrimination or mistreatment. Many had stayed silent because they didn't think anyone would believe them or care. David's case showed that people did care, and that speaking up could lead to positive change. A support network began forming, connecting veterans who had faced similar challenges. The gas station where the incident occurred became something of a landmark. The manager, who had offered David free gas that day, reported that business had actually increased as people stopped by to show their support. He eventually installed a small plaque near the gas pumps that read, "This station proudly serves all customers with dignity and respect, regardless of race, religion, or background." Chief Martinez, who had handled the crisis professionally and transparently, saw her department's community relations improve significantly. The changes she implemented became a model for other police forces around the country. A year after the incident, she was promoted to lead a larger department in a neighboring city, where she continued to champion police reform and community engagement. Officer Johnson, who had tried to de-escalate the situation that day, was promoted to sergeant and put in charge of training new recruits. He often used David's case as an example of how situations can spiral out of control when officers make assumptions instead of following proper procedures. David eventually returned to active duty, but his experience had changed him. He was more aware of social issues and more committed to using his platform responsibly. During his off-duty time, he continued speaking at events and working with his foundation. His military career flourished. The public attention from the incident had actually enhanced his reputation within the military community. His commanders saw him as someone who had handled a difficult situation with grace and dignity, qualities that were valued in military leadership. He was promoted ahead of schedule and selected for advanced training that would prepare him for senior leadership roles. The incident that he had never wanted to happen had actually accelerated his career in unexpected ways. But David never forgot the lesson of that day at the gas station. He learned that sometimes ordinary people are thrust into extraordinary situations, and how they respond defines not just their own character, but can influence the broader community around them. He also learned that change is possible, but it requires people to be willing to stand up for what's right, even when it's uncomfortable or inconvenient. Most importantly, he learned that one person's courage to do the right thing can inspire others to do the same. creating a ripple effect that extends far beyond the original incident. The gas station encounter lasted only a few hours, but its impact would be felt for years to come, changing lives, policies, and communities in ways that no one could have predicted on that hot Tuesday afternoon when David just wanted to go home.